think I'm going to roam.
So, attention. Thank you all again for coming this evening. My name is Victor Dover, and I'm a town planner along with my partner Joe Cole in Dover Cole and Partners. And I get to stand up here along with just a couple of others tonight and show you all the pictures and things. But before I do that, I wanted to make sure that you realize that I just am up here as the spokesperson for a much, much larger team of special people. And I'm going to read some names to you and ask you to join me at the end in thanking them, giving them your Hercules welcome. My partner Joseph Cole, our project director Sean Seaman, Sergio Vasquez, James Doherty, Gary Osborne, David San Ramon, Jeff Schreck, Marise Chael, who's an architect and also happens to be my wife, Derek Smith, Dorcas Perez, Steve Price, Peter Katz, Laurie Volk from Zimmerman Volk, Robert Gibbs and Jim Epping from Gibbs Planning Group, and Jim Desa and Julie Morgan from Fair and Pierce. Those are the folks who produced the images and things you'll see on the screen tonight. Thank you, guys. Now at this point they get to fall apart because they've all been staying up all night for several nights in a row, and we get to show you the images and ideas that have resulted from that process so far. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of that history. I'll get that out. First of all, this team, which includes Californians and non-Californians, went out onto the ground, not just looking through manuals or books or at the abstract stuff of maps. They went out and studied your place, trying to get to know Hercules, getting the aerial photographs and the on-the-ground photographs. They went to see special places around the region that many of you added to a list of places you wanted us to know all about. And when we went to those places, we measured them with measuring tapes and laser, and we photographed them, and we walked them off, and we counted floor tiles. How big is it? How wide is it? How far apart? What makes this place special? And we brought that information with us back into the situation. And then we sat over the last 10 days or so, hour after hour, one after another, about one per hour, in a series of interviews, individual one-on-one conversations about what's happened, what people have in mind, what they envision for particular pieces of property. And that included the private stakeholders, like the property owners and developers, and it included the citizen stakeholders, like neighbors and folks who have drawn what's come before, and citizen leaders. Last Friday night, many of you gathered in this room for a technical briefing, a fairly in-depth and intense and technical blow-by-blow examination of all the 24 or so parcels that make up the district plan study area, and the whole pipeline for development approvals and permitting, and which projects were in what part of the permitting pipeline, and which ones were already out the end and ready to go, and which ones were just thinking about entering it. You also heard in that presentation some of the thinking about the background analysis on retail and housing market in this place, transportation, and so on. And we gave you a few ground rules. And then the next day, last Saturday, in this very room, we broke into 10 groups, pretty big groups, but much smaller than if we all tried to design the future of Hercules at one time with one map. And at those 10 tables, which were spread around the room, people drew for several hours with a programmed set of objectives and questions, which they immediately departed from, being Hercules. People had a good idea of what they wanted to accomplish. They used markers and pencils and made lists and sketches, and then at the close of that, presented to one another what they had done. And it was a spirited group. And I think all of those people who raised their hand because they were here last Saturday, designing the future of Hercules and articulating your vision, deserve a round of applause right now. Now, having complimented them, I will tell you that the sketches and drawings that were produced were not necessarily great works of art. Some of them were. Some of them more crude than others. But there was a basic genius in those plans that said over and over and over what you thought was most important. You said, keep Hercules, Hercules, and you said, don't forget to connect the pieces. Following all of that, the professionals, the city's technical staff, the planning commission leaders, and all sorts of volunteers who've been going in and out of the Wells Fargo building have been working around the clock to reconcile those things into a single plan. We had special guest thinkers. Peter Katz, a national expert on real estate marketing and an author, came and gave a how-to toolkit session for developers and property owners on the business side of developing these livable communities folks talked about. And we cleaved our group into two teams. And one team worked on making one plan, one master plan drawing, which is still tonight only a very rough draft. Out of the 10 drawings that you had made, the master plan team worked to produce the sketches I'm going to show you tonight. And we also set a team to work with the job of visualizing a different kind of land development regulation for this place, a simplified, illustrated code, which would take the ideas you expressed to us and which have been embedded now in the plan and build them into the land development regulations, instead of finding out that the very thing you want to build is the thing that's illegal. There were a lot of number one ideas. And in one way or another, the theme that continued to come back over and over and over was this idea of connectedness. That these aren't individual little strands of property or shards and fragments that should be developed like asteroids floating in an asteroid belt, but rather that pedestrians should be able to move from one to another, and it should all add up to be Hercules. And that's the sense we got from your challenge to us to bring back to you a map that illustrates one coherent vision and real places, all of it interconnected. Ideas like making it walkable returned in 10 out of 10 table group presentations, and I hope you'll agree that that idea is expressed in the drawings you'll see tonight. Now, while that was going on in the real world, in the virtual world, there was also a tremendous amount of activity around the Hercules Plan website. Things were added on there. There were daily briefings. It's not nearly as complete as it will be soon. But an amazing number of people checked by to see what was going on by doing so online. One day 53 accessors, another day 90 accessors, another day 75, another day 32. When you add that up, that represents a tremendous number of people checking on Hercules Designing in Public process. What if you could grow the town you want, instead of just complaining after things are built and saying, if they'd only ask me? And what if every time somebody built one little piece of Hercules, it added up to implementing a piece of your vision? What if you could create streets that are the central and most visible public spaces in the town that balance the needs of pedestrians, motorists, and others? Where would you do that kind of stuff? After all, a lot of Hercules has already been built, not necessarily on a walkable community or memorable centers basis. Where would you find places to start expressing that idea? All you have to do is visualize the places you know as they will be changing and evolving over the next couple of decades. What if, before and after? Write a letter. Thank you. What if, for example, the BART Park and Ride lot were more than an inefficient surface parking lot in the heart of your town, but at the best real estate in the city and the best address on San Pablo Avenue, at the main intersection of San Pablo and Sycamore, that property were put to work as a catalytic part of building your memorable center. And, not coincidentally, a productive business engine that could drive the sales tax revenues you need to make Hercules fiscally sound. And what if those kinds of ideas really caught on? What if you started infecting with those kinds of of ideas of walkable streets and real Main Street, even Caltrans. And you right-sized your streets so that there was room for the parking and room for the sidewalks to the proper size. And what if, in front of stuff that doesn't necessarily have to always be in the front, like the gas pumps, you captured lost space that in the old days they thought you somehow minimized the visual impact by just putting a little berm or buffer, but it didn't make a place. And you recaptured that space, and you also made that space lucratively developed for the property owners. And what if that idea took really, that spark really became a flame and others began to emulate that idea? That's how you go from before to after. You visualize the place you know turning into what it could be, and then you go out and you promote the vision as hard as you can. Or you could choose the do-nothing approach and just see what happens. And so ask yourselves, when you look at the pictures of what could be, where would I prefer to live? Where would I be more likely to walk to get a cup of coffee, or to meet a friend, or to watch the 4th of July parade? That's kind of the heart of the idea, isn't it? That the center most important piece of Hercules, where San Pablo meets Sycamore, as it will be extended toward the waterfront, that you really don't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to form the center of the community at very high standards. Standards good enough for the people that have come to Hercules. And that's the idea there. And then extend out from that into that whole central piece of the lower Refugio Valley and the hilltops here around it to include other neighborhoods. A first-quality waterfront neighborhood for Hercules here, growing the town to its waterfront, as in experiencing the view, and making that experience available for everyone in Hercules, not just the exclusive province of those who move into that neighborhood. And what if you go back to work on some of the places that are kind of half-started, like the area around the Creekside Center, City Hall, properties that are between the railroad tracks and State Route 4, the opportunity parcels that exist adjacent there, and made real neighborhoods out of that, too. And recognize that there are things happening, like, for example, right in the middle of what I just described, your Outlet Village project, already out the pipeline of approvals, is about to take wing and get built. And when it does, what if you take advantage of all those folks that are going to come there and spend money and all that development activity to say, hey, on the next piece, we want urban design first. And on special sites that you only get one of, like the hilltop that commands a very powerful view as one enters the city from the south, the Citadel site of Hercules. You build a memorable hilltop neighborhood. So those are some of the kinds of ideas. And I guess the big picture idea is that it should be drawn in one map, not a thing that's done parcel by parcel, here and there, catch as catch can. Now let's go in to look at some of those in particular, like the centermost piece at the heart of town, the urban quarter that, yes, would have more things going on and more things closer to one another than occurs in the suburban outlying neighborhoods of Hercules, but that action center actually being active in a way that contributes value and quality of life. Now, we visualize that that kind of thing wouldn't happen all at once, that it's the kind of thing that would be built up over time. So visualize that it would unfold in phases, maybe not exactly as shown here, but gradually what you would create is a centermost park around the wetlands there. Many of you heard about the restoration project going on. A centermost part that from every direction is signal Hercules quality. And then behind it, you create urbane, elegant, and yes, higher density neighborhoods that have a mix of workplaces, places to live of varying sizes, and places to shop and spend money, places to be entertained. We began to realize, after we looked at all 10 tables and we saw how much effort had been expended at the center of things, that we needed to put special focus here. So I'll make a little disclaimer. Tonight we've got more to say there and more to say about the waterfront and a couple of other strategic pieces, but we don't have pictures or really finished ideas for the entirety of the plan. So there will be another presentation later on where we see more of those blanks filled in. Now there's a piece right in the middle of town, sorry the drawings rotated a little bit, that is this parcel here where Sycamore Avenue extended and John Muir Parkway or State Route 4 extended lead away from San Pablo Avenue toward the waterfront. And Remediation Financial, Inc., the company that has been cleaning up the so-called brownfield site, making it ready for development, is in the process of doing several things. One, it includes taking all of this green that you see on the maps there and rebuilding them after cleaning them up as a restored set of public and semi-public naturalistic spaces. The extension of the Refugio Valley Creek, for example, wetlands here and here. And then between them, we're backing up to the edges of the North Shore Business Park as it goes up the hill, and down in the lower parts that you saw in the pictures. They identified a series of development parcels, so-called parcels A, B, and C. And we were very respectful of the edges of these in the drawings, because those are the subjects of very, very hard to get, but in place, Army Corps of Engineers permits and a whole series of other agency approvals. And so the challenge we gave ourselves when we realized that really the center panel of the composition for the future of the Center of Hercules, the most important part, was right in there. We put special effort on thinking of how to optimize A and B. Parcel A and B. Now here's looking across that valley where you see the restorations and the preparation of the site for development taking place. And you're looking at the San Pablo Bay in the distance. You might recognize the remnants of the former industrial facilities at the water's edge. In the foreground is San Pablo Avenue. And remember what I showed you about that mixed-use, urban-style infill development on the park and ride lot that's in the foreground. Well, here's that central park, that wetland park, which we expect would be restored and after it's put into real use for the ecosystem and for water quality purposes, long views across it will be maintained for a very long time. You're going to have these vistas from almost every direction as you enter town, from San Pablo from one direction or the other, from Interstate 80, looking off the edges of it as this photographer was, and as you go toward the waterfront on Sycamore Extended or John Muir Extended. This is the stuff you're going to drive by. And we sort of imagined, it's just a sketch, just a draft, just a draft. We sort of imagined that might really be town facing that. And so every time you brought a visitor or every time you went through that part of town to go somewhere else on a trip or to your job, you'd look at that and you'd say, this is my town. How proud I am of this. And from a business point of view, look what a great address we can create there. And so that was the kind of effort that went into the thinking. Now, at the heart of the centermost view, at the heart of that diagram, it comes this potential development of parcels A, B, and C. Parcel A as a commercial component has been proposed. Parcels B and C were marked on maps for something else, like multifamily housing, and there are questions, like for example this piece, which is currently zoned industrial or office uses. And so that's not all figured out yet. And so we went to work looking at that. Now, you can imagine that after I built that up, and I said, this is a really important thing, and really get one shot at it, that we want to make sure it turns out really well. And we were keeping in mind all the things we heard last week about, if we're going to have those big national chains, they have to fit in. We heard that kind of thing. And we heard, we want doors and windows facing our streets. And we heard, we don't want those regular old strip shopping centers. So we've been thinking about how that might unfold. If that, for example, were seized, because it's handy and it's central and visible for the warehouse format users, what kind of permanent change of that vista I described might come instead of the one you saw. There's a before and after with the sort of strip shopping center format of parking lots in the front and buildings at the back. And there are other snags with that. As you start trying to fit that stuff in, you inevitably figure out that the back side of it is facing Parcel B. Parcel B users would have to struggle with the idea of backing up to a home improvement center or whatever other kind of user went there. So the first effort over the last several days was to try and manipulate the box. I'm just showing you some of the ideas. Here's a sketch showing a box with not all its parking in the front. And here's a box that's full size instead of a smaller or medium-sized one, and its larger parking ratio and how that kind of eats in. And we experimented. What if we added things on the edges to make the blank walls go away? But I'll tell you, just frankly, it was sort of a feeling of beating our heads against the wall, because the warehouse format use with its parking in the front with a very high parking ratio is a hard thing to fit into the heart of a town center. Not necessarily hard to do at the edges, but quite difficult. And these sketches really didn't feel satisfactory from the point of view of solving the things we talked about. Now here's an idea, and nobody's seen this. Okay, this idea hatched about 4:30 yesterday afternoon in a fit of exhaustion. And it may not go anywhere. It's the kind of idea that we want you to see and think about and then give us your feedback, but we don't want you to consider it by any means the only solution or the final solution or Victor's selling us this. But the thought is, go back and look at Parcel C again. Currently zoned for industrial or warehouse type tilt-up box uses. You wouldn't have to rezone it. And a kind of a sensitive parcel, because some of the companies that are just off the map over in the North Shore Business Park that are close to that have historically viewed that as a transitional zone where uses like housing, for example, might not happen. And so the experiment in this sketch is, what if you put the large format user, for example, home improvement center type store, not picking one brand in particular because that does seem to be another point of sensitivity, but just what if you put it there? And the interesting thing about that is, if you follow topo maps, you'll follow this. This site was recently altered in its topography to where there's kind of a steep slope on two sides of it, with the North Shore Business Park above on both sides. It gives you a place to nestle the backside that was so troubling in those other scenarios. And so here, this shows the idea of still a kinder, gentler big box, because it's had things added to it and it's got doors and windows facing the street. It's not a main street, but it is somewhat modified. But this scenario, which is locating a large format user or a home improvement store on Parcel C, gets us something very important. Lets us optimize parcels A and B and unify them. Let's call them Parcel AB into one coherent development of the walkable, livable sort you described, and it lets us put warehouse type format uses where warehouse format type uses were promised before. Interesting. And it also does something else. It lets them be what they want to be instead of trying to make them into something else. And that was, I'm just being very candid about the way this all seems to unfold. Part of the reason we're sensitive about that is we realize there is much to be done, much character to be generated, and much money to be made, both for the civic coffers and the developers, by developing smart growth at the waterfront. And we thought that by allowing the Sycamore arrival and the John Muir Parkway arrival to be as good as they can be, as one goes toward the waterfront and perhaps the future waterfront train station and other things, that would be a reason why the Parcel C alternative, the home improvement store, would be worth looking at. Now let's go take a look in the next part of the tour down at that waterfront. A very, very cool plan for the waterfront neighborhood has been generated by some excellent urban designers, Civitas, Dave Sargent. Many of you have met in previous hearings and things. This is a very neat project, and they've been quite artful about shaping it as one of those walkable, livable neighborhoods. Look, connected streets that actually go somewhere instead of those cul-de-sacs that are all over the place. It's so frustrating for walking or driving. That's a good move. Setting it up so that blocks and lots are organized where buildings can have their front sides facing streets instead of the back sides. So front porches or front doors instead of garage doors could look out over those streets. Very neat. And then down on the waterfront, the idea of capturing your once in a town opportunity to make a mixed-use waterfront center. We like that a lot, and they deserve a lot of credit. The Bixby Company is doing something that is not like what lots of other developers have been doing in Contra Costa County. They deserve your support for that. Now, why do we think they can be so ambitious? You have a very hot market. Laurie Volk from Zimmerman Volk went into detail about it last week. She's updating her reports based on her new observations. They're very upbeat. Your prices are phenomenal. The bottom line of her analysis is that in every category, single-family detached on the large lot mansion setup, small lot single-family detached, row houses or townhouses, and apartments in apartment buildings and apartments above shop fronts. In every category, this site presents the opportunity to be the best of its kind offered in Contra Costa County, if properly executed. And the if properly executed is the key part. And we've been spending a lot of time with developers of all stripes from all the different parts, looking at ways that, given the geometry of their sites, they might incorporate some of the ideas Bixby has been ambitious enough to incorporate from the beginning. Now, the Bixby folks were also very open-minded and generous, despite the fact that they've got a lot of time invested in the stuff you saw. When we sat down and said, gosh, can't we tweak this a little bit? Can't we get a little more of this or that? Including a sketch you see here to organize a real public square facing the waterfront, but on the upland side, so where the shops and restaurants and houses could be. One could have the experience of being in a signature public space that has the view of San Pablo Bay, and also eat in a restaurant and experience some of the retail things Bob Gibbs will talk to you about in a moment. What if San Pablo Bay and Marin County in the distance, and the edges of that waterfront square all set up so that you can see out because of the manipulation of floor levels and things. And then as the street goes down toward the waterfront, mixed-use buildings with storefronts that open up toward the sidewalks and have real-life doors and windows facing the street. I'm sorry to keep saying that thing about doors and windows, but that's the killer app. You can have the source code. Here it is, fronts and backs. Buildings with doors and windows facing the street. That's the key to optimizing the urban design experience in this place and making it walkable and livable. Here's a bigger picture view of that sketch in a sort of full build-out mode. Now, you might fill that in little bits at a time over a very long period of time as the market was there and the financing was ready and the customers were ready. Isn't something that happens all at once. The sidewalk you just saw might be that one, for example. And so here that is put into the Bixby plan for consideration. This is the first time they've ever seen that drawing, because we were drawing it up until about 7:29 p.m. tonight. So I'm looking forward to hearing what they think about it, and they'll give us their feedback, I hope you will too. And so now you look past all that, and it's surrounding residential neighborhoods and mixed-use, live-work type active environment on the waterfront, and you see that also part of it is the point. How many of you have ever seen the Seattle Gasworks Park? That was a reclaimed former industrial site that has a very, very beloved public space now associated with it. What if the point became Hercules' answer to that kind of place? And could it even, of course, include large garden spaces and open grasslands or a dog park section or all sorts of things. So it's a great big area. But it could also be one of those places that could be equipped with some civic facilities, like a place, for example, to hold an event. And now you've got the setup where the 4th of July parade could stage itself in front of the Albertsons and march down Sycamore past the main intersection and all of those things you saw in the urban quarter and go down Sycamore, arrive at the waterfront, where in Ken Morrow and John Petty's idea, you could, on the site of the old powder works, you could see the best fireworks display in the Bay Area. That's a vision for Hercules. So here's a sketch of reclaiming the old point and putting it to work as a waterfront urban park. The little building you saw might be like that one, for example, and associated with a pedestrian crossing of the railroad tracks so people can get over there. And hey, if you can do it, a vehicular crossing too, for service at least, would be best. Lots of questions to be answered about that. Let me just back that up. But you can imagine how as an ensemble, all the stuff Bixby can do on the upland, the stuff the city and the developers can do together on the Point Park and the future train station all makes the waterfront part of Hercules again. And there around those kinds of neighborhoods, which are obviously the top-tier sites and the earliest going, there are opportunities to do other special things. That long view one gets of this hilltop, for example, where today there's a tank farm, and maybe for the foreseeable future there will be a tank farm, but sometime in the future, during what we hope would be the 100-year lifespan of this master plan you're creating, you could go back and look at that as a developable parcel and maybe even develop it in such a way that it's not just another loft hillside, but a beautiful symbol of the city, like the Italian hill towns or the citadels or Acropolis type development. A long-term idea because there's a tank farm there now. But we all know, having seen the refinery go away in just the last few years and be replaced now with other kinds of things, that those sites do get reclaimed. And the challenge is, instead of just shaving off the hill and making it as flat as possible and then building as mundane as possible more housing product, as some of our developer colleagues like to call it, what about building a real place? When you look up that hill and see it, it's part of the memorable, meaningful image of the city. Such a thing could include all sorts of uses. It could include houses and housing and workplaces and expensive houses and inexpensive ones. It could include civic buildings or hotel or inn. Here's a plan idea of how that works. And believe it or not, in that sketch is embodied a very sophisticated thought about how you would work the topography, fit the parking, and add the buildings up with the fronts and backs features I talked about before. Now, I don't want you to get distracted by the architecture, because the architecture could be high Athens. The architecture could be Bay Area traditions. The architecture could be boomerang modern, if that's what you decide to make it. But the main goal should be make it a place. Then the last of the neighborhoods, what we've termed the Civic Center neighborhood. Here's your existing City Hall and Civic Drive, and the future of Creekside Center as planned for redevelopment. And this is a loose-knit collection of ideas because this part of the plan hasn't had as much work as some of those others. But you can see the idea of developing the opportunity parcels between once the loop of the freeway is rerouted. It's not good enough in those places to just develop object buildings that sit alone in their parking. And so there's lots of discussion going on about how to prevent that. To build the BART property out as the infill opportunity site I described to you, you need another place for BART parking, at least in the near term. And this sketch shows the idea of relocating on the O'Keefe property the BART park and ride facility. Could start as surface parking and become structured parking later. Nothing wrong with that. And then over here on the so-called Kaufman and Broad piece, you see a kind of sketch plan incorporating a lot of the ideas we learned from the developers, but also ignoring some of them just to get at the idea that buildings could front the most important street in town, instead of turning sideways to it, and the continuity of green and park space that is begun with your Refugio Valley Park and the linear creekway could be continued there. You also see a concept for integrating, not separating, the street network, but that doesn't mean all of the building types in there can be the same. You could do, for example, houses on a big part of it and do housing, like affordable or senior housing or apartment buildings on another part. What we are suggesting here is no firewall between them, no gated community, this is us and that is you strategy, but instead connect the streets and have an apartment building on the street and a house down the street. And then last, a site for a civic building. Now you'll see these little red maps, little red dots on the map, and the idea is that there are many good sites for future civic buildings, but that is certainly one of them. For example, in the tradition of the great American Carnegie libraries, a right-sized Hercules library could be created at the intersection of Civic Drive and Sycamore. But that's not the only possible use, and that's certainly not the only possible place you could put the library. So there will be a calm community conversation about that. And then, but you would be strategic about it. You would put the parking to the backside, for example, which showed up in Kaufman and Broad sketches, and you would put the front door facing the street, so pedestrians and others who arrive at this place would see the front of the building, not the back. And you wouldn't hide it, as has been the practice with civic buildings in the past, for example, in the adjacent town hall, behind berms and make it as low-slung as possible. No, you would say, this is a landmark building, we want everybody to see it, and we want to show them how proud we are of the institution inside here and of our town. Okay? That might mean, for example, designing some of it with double height spaces and a taller building than would otherwise be necessary if you were just engineering a library. And then as you go along the sidewalk, and tree-lined, we hope, along Sycamore, you would encounter the rest of the neighborhood, like the residents that face that street with their front doors. Take some extra grading, take some extra expense. So that's the idea. Now, we're going to now go into two technical pieces of this. Bob Gibbs, who I described to you last week as the best retail planner on the planet, and it's true. He turned